We spend nearly our entire lives inside boxes. We sleep in a box, we commute in a metal box, we work in a glass box, and then we go back to our residential box to unwind. We design cities, we design homes, we design every square inch of our modern environment. But here is the strange paradox of the design world. In most architecture and design schools, students spend years learning about structural loads, tensile strength, and material durability, yet they learn almost nothing about the actual human minds that will occupy those spaces. Why should an architect spend as much time studying the human mind as they do studying concrete?
That is the exact question that keeps me awake at night. We have mastered the art of keeping the roof from caving in, but we are completely ignoring whether the room beneath that roof is quietly driving us crazy. Think about it. If you were to take a top-tier, award-winning interior designer and a world-class psychologist, put them in a room together and ask them to scientifically design a space optimized for human flourishing, they would probably stare at each other in total silence. They wouldn't even have a shared vocabulary.
Because the designer is looking at the floor plan, the lighting fixtures, and the spatial flow, while the psychologist is looking at behavior, emotional triggers, and cognitive load. They are trying to solve the same problem: how to make human beings feel good, but from two completely isolated universes.
Exactly. And that gap is where we lose so much potential in our built environments. If we don't understand how a physical space interacts with human psychology, we aren't really designing for people at all. We are just arranging pretty objects. To truly bridge that gap, we have to look at design through the lens of psychology, starting with something as deeply personal as psychodynamic theory. This is the idea that our early life experiences fundamentally shape who we are and what we need to feel secure.
So you are saying the bedroom I had when I was 7 years old is somehow dictating the kind of living room I want to sit in today.
100%. Our subconscious is basically a massive archive of sensory memories. If you grew up in a chaotic environment, you might subconsciously crave extreme minimalism and symmetry in your adult home to feel a sense of control. Or conversely, if you grew up in a very cold, sterile house, you might fill your spaces with rich textures, warm colors, and a slight, cozy clutter to compensate. If an architect doesn't understand that a client's spatial preferences are deeply rooted in their early psychological development, they might design a technically flawless house that the client simply cannot feel at home in. It will never resonate with their core identity.
That makes a lot of sense. It shifts the conversation from what looks good on a magazine cover to what feels right in the nervous system. But it's not just about our personal childhoods, is it? We are also carrying around millions of years of biological programming. I'm thinking about evolutionary psychology here. Our brains are incredibly ancient, yet we are forcing them to process incredibly modern environments.
Oh, this is where it gets fascinating. We are walking around with software that was coded on the prehistoric savanna, but we are trying to run it inside skyscrapers. Evolutionary psychology tells us that human behavior is still heavily driven by survival instincts. For example, why do people naturally gravitate toward the corner booth in a restaurant, facing the door?
Because nobody wants someone walking up behind them while they are eating. You want to see the whole room. It's the classic need to spot the predator before it spots you.
Precisely. It is called prospect and refuge theory. We want a safe, enclosed space at our backs, the refuge, and a clear, expansive view of our environment, the prospect. When a designer understands this, they stop putting desks in the middle of open-plan offices with people's backs exposed to heavy foot traffic. That kind of design constantly triggers a low-level fight-or-flight response. People feel exhausted at the end of the day, and they blame the workload, but half the time, they should be blaming the floor plan. If we align our modern structures with our ancient biological instincts, spaces suddenly feel natural. They feel right even if you can't articulate why.
It is almost like the building is communicating with our primal brain, bypassing our conscious thought entirely, which brings up a really critical dynamic. The relationship between the environment and the individual is not a one-way street. We tend to think that we impose our will on a room, we paint it, we furnish it, we organize it. But environmental psychology suggests the exact opposite is also happening every single second. The room is imposing its will on us.
It is a constant dialogue. You shape the space, and then the space shapes you. Let's scale this up from a room to a city street. Imagine you are walking down a narrow sidewalk. Right next to you, cars are zooming past at 50 miles an hour. There are no trees, just concrete and noise. How do you feel?
Tense, rushed. I'm probably gripping my bag a little tighter, looking straight ahead, and walking as fast as I can to get out of there. I am definitely not stopping to chat with a stranger.
Right. The environment is injecting a constant, underlying sense of risk into your nervous system. That physical setup is literally altering your social behavior. It isolates you. Now take that exact same street, but widen the sidewalk by 10 feet. Add a physical buffer of trees between the pedestrians and the cars. Put in a dedicated painted bike lane. Add a few benches. What happens to your behavior now?
The tension drops. I slow down. I might actually notice the storefronts or stop to let a dog pass by. The environment is giving me permission to relax and be a social creature again.
Exactly. The environment invites socialization. It is the invisible hand guiding human interaction, and this is where the profound responsibility of the designer comes in. When you draw a line on a blueprint, you are not just defining a physical boundary, you are dictating how strangers will interact with each other for the next 50 years.
That is a staggering amount of power when you really think about it. And it borders on some deep ethical territory. If design can dictate behavior to that degree, we have to talk about behavioral psychology. When we start designing spaces specifically to alter how people act, it can start to sound a little dystopian. It sounds like social engineering or mind control. How do we draw the line between designing for well-being and manipulating human behavior?
That is the most important philosophical question in architecture today. But when we talk about behavioral psychology and design, we aren't talking about stripping away free will or brainwashing the public. We are usually talking about fundamental safety and harm reduction. The data on this is overwhelming. Chaotic, dirty, poorly lit urban areas don't just look bad. They actively increase aggression and crime. When an environment signals that nobody cares, that the social order has broken down, it triggers a behavioral response in the people who move through it.
The classic broken windows theory. If a space feels abandoned, people treat it with less respect and the baseline for acceptable behavior drops.
Exactly. But as designers, we have the tools to mitigate that hostility. We can literally design out the aggressive signals of a city. By introducing strategic lighting, clear sightlines, and public art, we replace the signals of chaos with signals of order and care. We aren't forcing people to be good. We are removing the environmental friction that encourages them to be bad. A well-lit, beautifully maintained public square doesn't control your mind, but it does tell your subconscious that you are in a safe, civilized place, and people naturally rise to the occasion of their environment.
So we are using design as a deterrent for negative behavior, essentially curing the symptoms of urban decay through spatial psychology. But I want to push this even further. Up to this point, we have been talking about fixing problems. We are soothing childhood trauma. We are calming our ancient survival panic, and we are preventing crime. It is a very defensive approach to design. What happens if we go on the offensive? What if we stop looking at what is wrong with people and start looking at what is right?
Now we are entering the realm of positive psychology, which is arguably the most exciting frontier for designers today. Standard psychology historically spent most of its time diagnosing illness and dysfunction. But positive psychology asks, what makes life worth living? How do we achieve joy, meaning, and a state of flow? Translating that into architecture means we stop designing merely to prevent misery, and we start designing to actively cultivate human potential.
I love that framing. Designing for potential. What does that actually look like in practice? How does a floor plan create joy or meaning?
Let me give you a hyper-local example. Imagine a neighborhood that has historically been marginalized, but within that community, there is an incredibly rich culinary tradition. Maybe the families there are famous for specific, generational recipes. A traditional, highly technical architect might come in to revitalize the area and just build standard, efficient housing blocks. They solve the problem of shelter. But a designer trained in positive psychology looks at that community and sees an untapped reservoir of cultural pride.
So instead of just building apartments, they look for a way to amplify that specific strength.
Exactly. That architect would design a central, beautiful community kitchen. They would build open-air market stalls integrated right into the residential squares. They create a physical stage for that talent to be showcased. Suddenly, the architecture isn't just housing people, it is building identity. It is fostering a sense of achievement and economic opportunity. It turns a private family recipe into a public point of pride. That is what happens when you design for potential. You aren't just giving people a place to exist, you are giving them a platform to flourish.
It completely redefines the metric for a successful building. A successful building isn't just one that stays standing and meets the energy code. A successful building is one that leaves its occupants psychologically richer than when they entered. We have walked through psychodynamic theory, evolutionary instincts, environmental feedback loops, behavioral safety, and positive psychology. It becomes glaringly obvious that psychology is not some optional elective course that designers can take if they have free time.
It is the absolute foundation. You cannot separate the human mind from the spaces it inhabits. Every time a designer makes a choice about lighting, acoustics, layout, or materials, they are making a psychological intervention in someone's life. Once you realize that, the entire profession shifts. You realize that at the end of the day, we aren't really building walls and roofs and streets. We are building human experiences. The concrete and the glass are just the medium. The human condition is the actual project.
It is a profound shift in perspective. It demands a lot more empathy and a lot more curiosity from anyone who shapes our physical world. And it leaves all of us who inhabit these spaces with a new lens to view our daily lives. The next time you find yourself feeling anxious in an office or at peace in a public park or totally uninspired in your own living room, take a moment to look around. Ask yourself, what is this space trying to tell me? And more importantly, how is this space trying to make me feel?